All right, folks, we're going to get going. I hope my new voice intimidates you. I sound like the Godfather, so everybody get a seat, or we'll have to break some legs. Welcome, everyone, to the Strategic Planning Workshop. My name is Jim Gilmore, and I was going to be sort of chairing this today, but because of technical difficulties, I'm just going to introduce Bob, and Bob's going to walk us through this whole thing. So, Bob, take it away.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and rest your voice. So this is just a fairly informal workshop to count as step one for development of our next strategic plan. The current ASMFC strategic plan extends through the end of this calendar year, and which means the Commission needs to develop a new strategic plan for 2019 to 2023. And Deke just handed out an agenda which sort of steps through how we're going to occupy the next hour and a half or so. And really, it's just a review of where we are with the current strategic plan, review the results of the Commissioner survey. What did you guys say about yourselves and how things are going at the Commission? And the review of the Commissioner survey is really to set the stage for the issues that you may want to incorporate into the next strategic plan. We'll propose a process and timeline for moving forward, and then we'll get into a little bit of specific discussion on vision and value, driving forces, and the goals, and then we'll verify that we're all going in the right direction. This is the ASMFC strategic plan, but if the federal partners want to sit at the table and chime in, I think they're more than welcome. Obviously the Fish and Wildlife Service, NOAA Fisheries, PRSC, DC, everyone's welcome to come to the table and chime in on this. We also have public comment opportunity. If there are folks in the public that feel there's major shifts or even insignificant shifts in direction that the Commission should take but incorporate into the next strategic plan, I think those comments can be incorporated during the conversation this morning. We'll keep it relatively informal. So with that, are there any questions on kind of the agenda or proceeding through the workshop here this morning? All right, seeing none. Jessica, do you mind pulling up the presentation? All right, I didn't have my computer open, so I'll just read off the screen. I'll just give a quick overview of what the current strategic plan includes. As I mentioned, it expires at the end of this calendar year. For those folks that were around 5 years ago, this current strategic plan doesn't represent a complete rewrite of what we had in previous years. It was a tweaking. We reworked the vision in particular because it included that we were going to rebuild all stocks by 2015, and that timeline got to be a little bit onerous and difficult, so that was removed, and I'll go over the current vision in a minute. But next slide, please. The current vision that we have is sustainably managing Atlantic coastal fisheries. Obviously, this should be the touchstone for the Commission and what everyone refers back to as we make decisions at the Commission. And if there are changes, feel free to let us know about that. But I would assume that the vision is one of the things that will keep static from this plan to the next. Next slide. The values, the current plan has a number of values, and these are really values across the Commission for commissioners and staff and really the way the organization operates. And they come down to effective stewardship of marine resources through partnerships, sound science-based decisions, long-term ecological sustainability, transparency and accountability in all actions, timely response to new information, use of adaptive management, balancing resource conservation with economic success of coastal communities, efficient and effective use of time and fiscal resources, and then working with integrity, honesty, and fairness. Those are the overall sort of overarching values that we are supposed to apply as the Commission goes through its daily business. Next. Driving forces. The current plan has a number of driving forces, and really these are influences that push the Commission in certain directions, that influence the decision that the Commission makes, that influences the budget that's available, influences the political climate in the states, and everything else that the Commission does. These are forces that exert pressure on the Commission and ultimately result in the direction that the commission's going. So this may be an area that is worth some reconsideration and thought moving forward. Are the same driving forces pushing the commission, or will they be over the next 5 years? The current driving forces are pressure on fishery resources in the industry, science-based management, legislation is always a driving force. Resources at the commission level, state level, and federal level are always significant for the commission. Ecosystem functions, ocean planning, competing uses in the ocean is obviously a big issue. Climate change is something that came up quite a bit in the commissioner survey that Deke will present in a few moments, but it is something that likely will be carried forward and may need a even more prominent role in the next strategic plan. And Protected Species Listing, Endangered Species Act, Marine Mammal Protection Act. As the Lobster Board talked about yesterday, whales are going to be a significant issue that the Commission and the federal government are going to have to wrestle with over the next few years. So that may be another area that needs to get highlighted as well in the new strategic plan. Okay. The current plan has 7 goals in it. I think these goals generally are the right overarching goals for the commission. There may be some tweaking that's needed, but really these are the broad categories that the commission operates under. Goal 1 is fishery management, rebuild, maintain, and fairly allocate Atlantic coastal fisheries. Goal 2 is fisheries science, which is provide the scientific foundation and conduct stock assessments to support informed management. Goal 3 is law enforcement, essentially. Promote compliance with FMPs to ensure sustainability or sustainable use of Atlantic coastal fisheries. Next. Goal 4 is habitat, which is protect and enhance habitat, fish habitat and ecosystems through partnerships and education. Goal 5 is our outreach to stakeholders, strengthen stakeholder and public support for the commission. Goal 6 is the legislative activities that we engage in on Capitol Hill and through the state legislative processes. So advance commission and member states' priorities through proactive legislative policy agenda. Next one, please. And the final goal that we currently have is sort of the administration of the commission and our staff, which is ensure the fiscal stability and efficient administration of the commission. It's worth noting that the current strategic plan does not include a goal for ACCSP. As folks will remember, ACCSP was rolled into the ASMFC as one of its programs a couple of years ago, and so it was prior to the current, it was after the current strategic plan was written. So one of the considerations that will need to be considered when developing the 2019 to 2023 strategic plan is adding an additional goal for ACCSP that will fully incorporate the activity of ACCSP into the ASMFC strategic plan. So that's a quick overview of the ASMFC. I think it's there's a question slide. Yeah, okay, just, that's a quick overview of the ASMFC plan. Are there any questions on where we are with the current strategic plan? It's a pretty quick summary of what's included in the document. All right, seeing none. In continuing to save Jim's voice, the next agenda item is a review of the results of the annual commissioner survey. As Deke's going to come up and give that presentation, but just setting the stage. That's a survey that we ask you guys all to fill out. We bug you, Jim bugs you, and we try to get as much participation in the survey as we can each year. And the goal of that is really a self-reflection of the commissioners. How do you guys feel we're doing as a group and moving toward implementation of the strategic plan and achieving the commission's goals? So Deke can take it from there.
Good morning. Thank you. Can go to the next slide. Okay. This survey was initiated in 2009 as a self-evaluation of progress towards the Commission's vision and goals after the adoption of the 2009 to 2013 strategic plan. And the survey was updated in 2015 by the chair, vice chair, and staff to increase participation. The 2017 survey, which is the survey we're about to look at, was open January 4 through 19 of 2018. And as you can see, 34 commissioners participated this year. Commissioners or proxies participated this year. So it's up from last year. Next slide, please. A quick overall overview of the results. There's a notable uptick in overall commissioner disposition from last year to this year. So that can be seen in an increase of scores for 11 of the 15 questions. And also note that only 2 scores decreased by more than a percentage. Concerns continue for intra-commission cooperation and climate change and the resulting impacts of that. We can go next slide. So the biggest decreases in the scores, and these are the 2 I mentioned, the only 2 that fell by more than 1%, were satisfaction with commissioner cooperation, which dropped sharply in 2016 and then fell moderately in 2017. And then this other metric that was added in 2015 using stocks where overfishing is no longer occurring as a metric for commission progress. This metric has dropped in commissioner satisfaction each year since it was introduced. And then the next slide shows just the overall lowest performing scores from 2017. And that would again be cooperation with commissioners, cooperation with our federal partners, and our ability to manage rebuilt stocks. Okay, then moving on to the second part of the survey was 5 fill-in-the-blank questions. So 2 of them had to do with commission products. The most useful, as noted by you, you could sort of separate into 2 categories, and those were products that staff created, like meeting materials, and then services provided by staff, like stock assessment training. So I listed pretty much all of them up here. Then the next portion of that was what are some products that the commission could create to help you, and some of those were simple, like direct phone numbers for staff, and some were quite complex, like developing a fisheries monitoring dashboard. So staff will adopt these recommendations as resources allow wherever possible. And our final slide is the other comment sections, and really these were all across the board, but throughout all the questions, the themes were, as you can see, commissioner cooperation and the impacts of climate change, especially as they relate to shifting stocks and allocation of those stocks. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Deke. Any questions on the commissioner survey results? Richie White.
Are you looking for comments or just questions?
Either one's fine right now, yeah.
Okay, thank you, Bob. A couple comments. One, we continue to not get close to 100% participation. Since I think most of the people that participated let the staff know that they did the survey, is it worth it for the staff to contact the people that did not and just ask why, and to see if there's some way of trying to increase it and solve the issues that the reason why these people aren't participating? So that's one. Secondly, it might be good to add a question in the next survey. Did you complete the previous one? Because with the turnover in the commission, you have a lot of new people coming in, and where we continue to look at our past performance, that this might be interesting to just see the number of new participants each year, and I don't know how we would use that, but I think it would be an interesting data. Thanks.
Great, thanks, Richie. Yeah, participation is something we've always struggled with and tried to maximize. John Clark.
Thanks, Bob. Hey, Deke, you said one of the areas that was low was commissioner cooperation, and then that turned out to be something that was commented on quite a bit. Were comments more specific about, is it other commissioners not cooperating with those who responded, or, you know, was it a common theme that came up?
Yeah, it was I would say all aspects, but a lot of it was related to compliance issues, and a little bit of states working in a single state's interest rather than the interest of the coast as a whole.
We've got Rob O'Reilly and then David Pierce.
So I really think the intention of everyone is to fill out the survey, but I also know the bombardment factor when we receive this and everything else, that sometimes it slips by. It happened to me 2 years ago. I still filled it out, but I think I was 10 days late. So my suggestion would be, I don't think a lot of research is needed by the commission members to answer the questions for the survey. If you want 100% adherence, then there ought to be a 20-minute time period carved out somewhere within one of the meeting weeks so that we can go through that. And, you know, I think that would also help stimulate some questions among members who would, you know, not have the disconnect from the time the survey was filled out individually till the time that we see the results here. So that's my suggestion.
David Pierce.
Well, I'll only emphasize that without knowing who filled out the survey questionnaire this year versus the previous year, the comparisons between years are meaningless. When you see a drop, okay, why? You know, I know what I did last year, what I said last year, and I know what I said this year, so I can evaluate my own perspective in terms of a change from one year to the next. But I don't know if the same people filled out the questionnaire as I did last year and this year, so you can't really judge changes from one year to the next. Perspectives offered up, opinions offered up, you know, in written form, those are useful, but the comparisons don't really do much. And I do agree with Rob that it's far more important to set aside specific time when all commission members have an opportunity to, you know, do it, as opposed to waiting for the commissioners to fill it out and send it in and being reminded to send it in. It doesn't work well. That approach doesn't work well. There has to be a real focused effort to get it done and done well, so we can get a nice perspective of the vast majority of members.
Thank you. David Borden, do you have your hand up?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. David just made one point, so I won't repeat that, but one of the questions, the responses to it, that trouble me is this question number 9, are you satisfied with the Commission's ability to manage rebuilt stocks? And we consistently get poor marks, or less than optimal, I guess is a better way to characterize it, marks on that. And you know, I think that, at least from my perspective, I think that deserves some attention. In other words, the people that are filling this out are basically giving us high marks for ending overfishing and much lower marks for managing a rebuilt resource. And we should be able to tease through those issues and try to figure out exactly what it is that people don't like. The complaint that I seem to get a lot is that we're not fully utilizing rebuilt stocks to to the extent that we could, you know, for instance, dogfish, and there are reasons for that, but I think that deserves a little bit of attention from the Commission. With that mark, in my view, should be one of the higher marks. It's, you know, it's a success story, and yet it's not, it doesn't fall into that category. Thank you.
Great, thanks. Any other questions? Eric Reed.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I agree with all the previous speakers for sure. Of course, statistically, if you ask the state of Maine, we only have to fill out 10% of the forms. That's the first thing. So, you know, statistically, we're in good shape. Just wanted to point that out. But yeah, David's right. You know, yeah, all kidding aside, I mean, David is right. You know, when we have a success story, we need to be able to take advantage of that success story in a much more timely fashion than we do. I mean, that's the complaint I hear. Well, you know, the thing's 3 times MSY or whatever it is, how come we can't catch more of it, and how come it takes so long? If it goes the other way, of course, you know, we can react to the bad news pretty quickly, but we have to improve our performance when we've actually done our job. So, thank you.
Dennis Abbott.
Yes, thank you, Bob. I've always filled out the survey when I got them. As a proxy, at moments I didn't. But regardless of that, I don't keep the previous year's one. So when I look at it, I won't say I don't give it a lot of thought. You ask me a question, I'm going to look and I'm going to put down a 7 or 8 or whatever comes to mind. I have no real criteria in my mind for necessarily why I assign an exact number. It might be helpful if I had kept the surveys, but I don't know if I could print them out, I guess, before I send them in. So it would be nice if I had them so I could make a comparison. Our biggest issue seems to be cooperation amongst the commissioners, and I think that was probably one of my answers too. You know, I'm concerned about self-interest. I think we're seeing more self-interest amongst the states rather than being a compact working for the mutual benefit. So the survey tells us that that's an issue. How do we get at that issue? How do we improve that? Is it possible to get at that issue, to improve cooperation between the states? We're all human beings, and, you know, we have our own state interest. We have our, you know, the way we are inside ourselves. So I don't know what we do about that, but that's something I think is the most important thing that we attack from doing this survey. Is that not true?
That seems good. Yeah, Richie.
Thank you, Bob. To answer Dave Borden's the issue he raised, I give that one low marks every year, and my perspective is it's allocation that we really struggle with allocation. It's understandably why, but you know, it's very difficult, and a lot of people come away feeling an allocation is not fair, you know, every time. But that's my take on that issue.
Yeah, allocation is tough. Winners and losers. Any other comments or thoughts on the commissioner survey?
What do I can think about doing?
Jim was just commenting, you know, about the notion of bringing all the commissioners together and sort of doing a real-time survey, as Rob suggested, and doing it over buffet breakfast at the annual meeting or something, you know, so everybody's sort of brought together. You can use some real-time polling and SurveyMonkey and other things that can, you know, put the results up pretty quick, and we can start immediately talking about those. So we'll look into that and see what would be an efficient way to do it. With that, I think we'll go real quickly to the next, excuse me, the next agenda item, which is proposed process moving forward here. Jessica, if you could go. You got it. Great, thank you. So staff's kind of working from the perspective that we probably don't need to rip up our current strategic plan and start all over. We need to tweak it. So what we're proposing is pulling together a working group of commissioners, and the size of that and makeup of that, we can I can work with Jim and Pat Kelleher as the leadership and decide how big that group is and who should be on it. But I don't think it needs to be a overly large group by any means. Staff can do all the heavy lifting. And the goal of, and the charge to that group will be essentially incorporate some of the discussion from today into a new draft of the strategic plan. We'll bring that plan to the commissioners in August. So we won't do it in May, but we'll do it in August. And we'll have another workshop to review the changes to the strategic plan in August. We had final approval at the annual meeting in New York City later this year. So that's the timeline and process we're proposing. Again, we can, in a minute, we'll start talking about some of the specific elements of the strategic plan. But, if the group agrees that we don't need to fully rewrite this, I think that's probably a pretty efficient way to do it, a working group, and revisit this in about 6 months, final approval at the annual meeting. So that's what we're proposing right now. And with that, we don't need to just sort of keep that in mind and think about that as we go on for the next little discussion. All right, great. So now, agenda item number 5 is kind of jumping into the meat of the current strategic plan. What are your thoughts collectively as a group of commissioners on what needs to be changed, what doesn't need to be changed, what can stay static? I mentioned at the very outset that the vision that's included in the current plan was tweaked from the last one because the previous vision included a 2015 deadline for rebuilding all the commission stocks, and then the commissioners agreed for various reasons, a number of stocks could not be rebuilt by 2015, and were not rebuilt by 2015. So the vision was changed to what's up on the screen right now, and it's probably a good place to start. The current vision, sustainably managing Atlantic coast fisheries, are folks comfortable keeping that? Are there any thoughts on changes or adjustments to that vision, or should we just keep the overall vision of where the commission's going consistent for the next 5 years? Dr. Pierce.
Just back up a little bit. We have a mission statement that was created in the 1942 Compact. I'm trying to catch up now going through the existing strategic plan, and when I look at the mission statement, I immediately wonder whether we have done a good job or whether we should take another look at that mission statement to see if indeed the vision statement and then the rest that follows is really consistent with the mission. The reason why I say that is the mission is to promote better utilization. And this gets to the point made by Eric about better utilization, allocation issues that relate to changes in distribution because of climate effects and whatever else, better utilization. And then it says, as an important part of the mission, prevention of physical waste of the fisheries from any cause. So I'm going back now and reading the mission, and I'm thinking about all the discussion we've had about discarding and how do we minimize discarding, and how states come up with conservation equivalency proposals that factor in reducing discarding and waste, therefore reducing mortality in their states. So anyways, we're not going to visit the mission statement, but I suggest that as we move forward, as staff gives this further thought, we might all want to step back a little bit and reflect on what was done back in 1942, and are we really properly addressing that mission through all of the the strategies that we've been using, and maybe we want to consider anew as we go forward for the next 5 years or so.
Thank you, David. That's a good point. The mission is kind of hardwired into the compact. Ultimately, you guys could change the compact if you wanted to, but that's a pretty heavy lift. But I think David's right. The commission is founded in that mission statement, and our is the commission in general going in the direction consistent with the mission from the 1942 compact is a good way to think about this, and a good perspective to have moving forward. So other thoughts on the vision that's up on the screen right now, that's in the current strategic plan? John?
I think if you could just refresh my memory, Bob, why do we, if we have a mission statement already, this vision is an odd little phrase there. What is the purpose of the vision statement?
That's a great question. When the commission developed its first strategic plan 15 years ago or so, it was a facilitated process, very involved. And one of the things that the group agreed they wanted at that time, and again, that's a long time ago, was a very quick soundbite that they could sort of reference back and put on all of our documents, and sort of be a very easy to remember, relatively easy to remember statement that, you know, sort of founds all the decisions that the commission makes. So that's where this came from. We don't have to have a vision statement. It's really, it's at the pleasure of the commission. It's your plan. So however you guys want it, but that's where the background of that odd little statement came from. Dr. Pierce.
Yeah, the vision statement, kind of fuzzy. I read it, sustainably managing Atlantic coastal fisheries. So to me, that means we're going to be managing our coastal fisheries every year in a sustained way. You know, it's got something is lost in the translation, I think. I've seen other mission statements that are along the lines of managing the coastal fisheries for sustainable yield, or something like that. So I'm not trying to be cute here, but again, sustainably managing the Atlantic coastal fisheries, I think that needs a little bit more attention. My glasses are fogged up on that one. You know, what are we trying to do? What's the vision to sustainably manage them? Okay, but we've been doing that since 1945 or so. Every year, meeting and managing these fisheries and making changes and dealing with, you know, the need to cooperate with the New England Council, the Mid-Atlantic Council, South Atlantic Council, et cetera, incorporate the fishing industry's advice, their insights. One reason why I say this is that my agency is now putting together our next 5-year strategic plan, and it's slow going, and we're working on our vision statement and all the rest. So I'm more sensitive now than I ever have been to the need for real clarity with all of the parts that we use for for strategic planning. So anyways, that's the point I wanted to make.
Thanks, David. Well, if you come up with a good vision statement, maybe we'll borrow it. So that's good.
I was hoping to use yours.
Yeah, there you go. We'll just keep waiting on each other. Doug Grout.
Yeah, I remember when we were trying to develop this vision statement, there were multiple varieties, and there were people that wanted more clarity. Other people wanted something simple and to the point. And I think the benefit of having this or something that's short and sweet like this is so that when we go out to the public, when we have it on our letters, we can use this as a overarching term. And it's going to, if we decide to modify this, it will be a struggle because of the way different people word things. You know, some people like to be very wordy about these and very descriptive, and other people like just the simple and broad statement. The thing that brought me to be comfortable and support this mission statement when we came up with is that the details are down below. This is the overarching, the details are in the goals. The details are in, some of the driving forces, the other things that are part of our strategic plan. This is the vision. It's something we want to all be able to look up at, and we can all get our hands around without having to think about a lot of the details, because that details is in a different part of our strategic plan. So that's my 2 cents worth on this.
Great, thank you, Doug. Robert Boyles.
Thank you, Bob. Not to be a wet blanket, I didn't like this vision statement when we adopted it 5 years ago. And specifically, I look at this as this is the state of the world now. And the state of the world now really doesn't require a lot of vision, at least the way I tend to think of it. And if I recall the conversation, you know, I made some quip about fish for today, fish for tomorrow. I think of a vision statement as being something forward-thinking, prescriptive, the things that we're working towards that were not there, and the goal statement being the things that we're doing to get us towards our vision. So at risk of being a Donnie Downer, I'd just suggest to you that this is maybe what we'd like to think we're doing today. But it's not much of a vision statement in terms of where we want to go. And you know, let me quote Justice Holmes. I find the great thing in this world is not so much where we stand as in what direction we're moving. And I would just propose that we craft a vision statement to talk about where we would like to go, not what we're doing today. Thank you.
I think I got to throw a word on this one.
Jim's going to make an effort to speak.
Before you said that, Robert, I was thinking back a few years ago, and there was some wise person in the room that had a vision statement of fish today, fish tomorrow, or something along those lines, and I think that was you. And I thought it was elegant because it looked at where we were today, but maintaining where we were going into that future. So, and I think this evolved from that. So, anyway, just a comment. I thought you were spot on, you know, back then, and I think we really need to kind of follow that theme and not get wrapped around the axle, because I think at one point this was 7 sentences long, and then we just made it simple again. So, anyway, thanks.
Roy, did you have your hand up?
I was just going to lend a little historical perspective on this. When we went through this 15 or so years ago, everyone on the commission participated in the process because it was a facilitated discussion with work groups that involved whiteboards and crossing out and adding to and that kind of thing. So I just want to give that perspective so we don't jump into making revisions with haste over what was a fairly deliberative process, which is not to say that it's cast in stone, but I'd hate to see us abandon everything from that effort with just general hand-raising comments from an audience, as opposed to involving everyone again in a comprehensive process like we used before. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. Other comments about the vision? Yes, Dennis.
Yes. And 15 years ago when we did it, this was not our vision statement. You know, after living with that and realizing that it wasn't attainable, then I think that this became like a compromise vision statement to some degree. This was more a look at reality of where we were and where we're going, if we do well to sustainably manage.
Great, thank you. John?
Yeah, thanks, Bob. Not to belabor it, but we're calling it a vision here, but you're talking about using it almost more as a slogan, which is something that should be memorable. This looks like something that was written by a committee. It's totally forgettable, whereas like what Robert talked about is something catchy that you remember, that you want to put on the stationery, that, you know, as I said, I wouldn't call something like, I call that more almost like a slogan or motto for the organization, whereas this, like I said, it's just not memorable and something pithy and catchy, not like an advertising jingle, but, you know, something that, like Robert said, fish today, fish tomorrow, tomorrow the world, whatever, but, you know, that's just much more catchy.
Great, thanks, John. Dr. Pierce.
Yeah, reflecting on the nature of our political discourse today, depending upon which TV channel we view, how we lean left or right, alt left or alt right. To me, there's a lot of discussion right now, and there will be over the next 3 years anyways, maybe 8 years, about values. What do we value? Are we keeping to the values that we've established for ourselves? Have we abandoned them? There's fear right now that many of the values that we hold near and dear through the democratic process are being tarnished or even abandoned as a consequence of leadership. Again, I'm not taking a political stance here. However, I look at the value statement that we have in our strategic plan, and these are really good. I mean, this tells everybody who we are, okay, what we subscribe to. So, somewhat facetiously, I guess I would say as a vision statement, not abandon our values. Give evidence that we subscribe to them, that we adhere to them. To me, that's a long-term vision that we're not going to give up. That these are the things we value and we're going to hold to them. Just one way of addressing it. We are who we are because of what we hold to be true and what we value. So, anyways, not abandon our values. If you want a catchphrase.
That's David Bush.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One suggestion I might make, maybe not into the nuts and bolts of this whole thing, but as far as something at the 30,000-foot level, like the vision statement should be something that's not just shared between the folks at the table, but the folks in the back of the room as well. Might not be a bad idea to maybe solicit some input for what a shared vision of what we should look like in the future would look like.
It's a good thought. Other comments on vision? So it seems to be kind of a split group. You know, some folks say what's up here is not really aspirational and unmemorable. Some folks are saying, well, it took a while to even get to this point, so maybe we should keep this. If we form a working group, is there any objection to, sort of using this as a starting point, but maybe see if we can, have the working group be a little bit creative, come up with some aspirational, more slogan-type bumper sticker things that may be more memorable and more sort of forward-looking. Just sort of food for thought, as we move forward. And then we can also, as David said, if the members of the public have some good ideas, we'll gladly take those as well. So is everybody comfortable with that as a charge to the working group? Maybe we'll have a staff contest or something to see who can come up with the best one. Yes, Doug.
One thing in hearing some of the comments here that comes to mind, that if we are going to consider making a significant change to our vision, I think we should have involvement of all the commissioners in this, and that may involve having some kind of a facilitated workshop. Now, it could be, depending as we go through this agenda item, we're going to go through different parts of the plan. It may just be the vision, or it may be something else, and we'll have to sort of gauge how deep and how long this workshop. But I think if we are going to consider changing the vision, I think we have to include all of the commissioners in that process.
That's a good point. And the timeline and process that I proposed earlier isn't set in stone. We can, if the conversation here gets to the point where, well, we may want to make some pretty significant changes to the strategic plan, we can rethink that and do something in May and put the time in that's needed to get it right. So with that in mind, the next thing on the list is vision. Is the values. As I mentioned, I read through those quickly at the outset. There's 8 or 10 of those in the current plan. And the values are really are used to ground and guide the activities and operations of ASMFC. David Pierce commented on them a little bit, that he seemed to feel that he was comfortable with the current list of values that are in the strategic plan. Values are written sort of in this motherhood and apple pie tone almost, that it's really hard to argue against any of these, but are there any of these that you would want to round out a little bit, or anything that you'd want to add to the list of values that, first read from my opinion is that they're fairly comprehensive, but I don't know if it captures everything, and I don't know if the commissioners feel they're contemporary. In other words, have things changed that need to be focused on and highlighted in our values over the last few years. So with that, any thoughts or comments on values? Sorry, Adam, didn't see your hand.
I feel we need to put focus, and going back to those comments about rebuilt resources and concerns about them, I think those comments get back to the question of access. And I don't feel anything in these values here, with the exception of the item about economic success of coastal communities, is the only item that really reflects the importance of that access. And I think angling communities as well as managers feel that that access is the driving force behind the concerns about not being satisfied with how we're dealing with rebuilt resources, and I would support a bullet point here that focuses on that.
Excellent. Thanks, Adam. It's a good point. Other comments on values? Yes, Roy.
Thank you, Bob. I would just like to suggest one that perhaps has been batted around a little bit at this particular meeting. Something to the effect of willingness to compromise the state's interests for the benefit of the managed resource as a whole. I just would like to see that concept in among our values. Thank you.
Thanks, Roy. And I guess that probably follows up on some of the comments that were made in the commissioner survey that we summarized earlier as well. Good. Other thoughts on the suggestions by Adam and Roy, or any other additions or subtractions for the values? Seeing none, that was fairly efficient then. All right, next on the hit list is driving forces. So as I mentioned earlier, these are mostly external forces that steer the commission in different directions. They're the forces that provide priorities as well as values that the commission's going to have to react to through sort of the changing world we live in, and how do we, what's going to steer the commission's activities over the next 5 years. We can put those driving forces are back up on the screen. So those are what's included in the document now. I think a lot of these are very contemporary still. Obviously, the ocean planning is going to be a big deal, obviously, with wind farms and wind turbines and other things, and potential oil and gas exploration off the coast. Obviously that one, in my opinion, needs to stay. Federal, state, and commission resources, dollars, and people. Those are limiting factors, obviously. Then, will continue to stay. Ecosystem functions. Obviously, we're putting a lot of energy into ecological reference points on Atlantic menhaden, and that may spread into other species. I think you can justify all of these being retained. Climate change or protected species, as I mentioned earlier, are both becoming even more important than they were 5 years ago when this document was written. The notion of that, I think Roy just touched on, cooperation and collaboration between the member states, isn't getting as high a mark as some would like, it seems. So is that something that needs to be included as a driving force, something that pulls the states back together, or is it the opposite, sort of this division of the states and states looking out for their own best interests? Is that a driving force that's going to influence how the commission operates for the next 5 years and beyond? And is that something that needed to be or should be recognized in this list? So those are you know, I think the list here is solid, and obviously these forces are going to have influence on how the commission operates over the next few years. But are there other things, or are there other ways these should be written to reflect that? Richie, and then I'll go on around the table.
Thanks, Bob. It seems like these were in a ranking order. I don't know if that's correct or not. But if that's the case, I would certainly move climate change up to second.
Yep, it's going to be a big issue. So that's, you know, I don't think there was a conscious effort necessarily to rank these, but I think closer to the top, it's, you know, stated or not stated, that it's more important. So any other thoughts? Dr. Pierce?
Yeah, it's a good list. I'd offer a suggestion on the science-based management part of it. Inside the plan itself, there's a paragraph that's very well put together, but it begins with a statement that is correct, but we might want to modify it somewhat to reflect not just the public and stakeholders, but all or many board members, ASMFC members. And that is, it begins by saying there is a tendency for the public and stakeholders to question the science supporting fisheries management decisions. It's not just the public and stakeholders. Myself, I often question the science. So I think it gets to the heart of the matter that not just those with whom we interact, public and stakeholders, but ourselves. We question the science. And so the text would have to be modified somewhat to explain why that is the case and why that is a very significant problem for us as managers who have to rely on scientific advice provided to us by our federal counterparts and also by our scientific staffs of each individual state that each individual state draws upon. I draw upon the technical advice of other states, and I think that happens in the case of other states needing to benefit from whatever we produce in Massachusetts. So I question the science, so that needs to be refined to reflect the nature of the discussions we as commission members have, where I think we all find ourselves at one time or another, questioning the science, which is fair and appropriate, as opposed to us, as this kind of suggests, moving forward with some blinders on with the stakeholders and the public trying to convince us that maybe the science isn't right, when we know darn well that oftentimes the science is very imprecise, it's very imperfect, despite the best efforts of the scientists to provide us with advice. So it's just a suggestion for a modification to that particular part of our of the driving force.
Excellent. Thanks, Dr. Pierce. Rob.
Thank you, Mr. Executive Director. And I'm just not sure what pressure means there in the first one, because that could mean a lot of different things. So what was intended when pressure was put down to be, and if Richie's right, if this is sort of any type of hierarchy, then to me, that's a bad way to start that off. But do you have some suggestions as to what that's talking about?
Pressure is, as you said, can mean a lot of things, and I think that's exactly why it was used. If you look at you may not have it in front of you, but all the paragraphs that follow each of these driving forces, pressure is noted as trophic interactions, habitat quality, availability, invasive species, climate change, all the other things that are influencing the success of a rebuilding of a resource, and then the fishing industry faces a variety of pressures, including global, national, local market forces, waterfront infrastructure, et cetera, et cetera. So pressure here is mostly used, for lack of a better term, in a negative way. It is There's a lot of pressure from the extractive side on fisheries resources. There's a lot of pressure on the economic side on individuals that harvest those resources. There's a lot of pressure on habitat and productivity of these stocks because of water quality and climate change and everything else. So there's a number of things working on the biological success of the species as well as the economic success of the folks that harvest these critters. So that was the logic 5 years ago, anyways. Where the plan says right now, there's just a lot of things that make fisheries management really difficult right now. Is really where they're going, I think. Sorry to be so depressing on that one. I had Roy and then Michelle.
Thank you, Bob. I would like to just add one that. In discussion with my colleague Craig on my left, I know is important to some of the folks in this room, and that is the economic ramifications of our actions. We haven't always given that sufficient attention, yet it's right there in our charter, and maybe we should add that to the list of potential driving forces in terms of our actions. Thank you.
That's good. Yeah, Jim just commented it's, at times it's difficult for the commission because we don't have the economic science and economic studies to fully detail those economic ramifications, but it's obviously considered around the room, and that's the value of the 45 commissioners is they bring their knowledge of the economic impacts, but it's probably we're spelling that out as much as we can. I had Michelle and then Dennis and then Adam.
Thanks, Bob. So going back to what you had mentioned previously about, one of the comments from the survey being this cooperation amongst the states, cooperation amongst commissioners, and I tend to think, I do think that's something that should probably be addressed because I tend to think of that as another pressure, so to speak. The states are pressured, by stakeholders, individual commissioners, receive pressure from stakeholders, and so I think that type of pressure is what can lead to what is perceived sometimes as a lack of cooperation. So, perhaps that is one of the pressures that could be incorporated into that paragraph.
Great. Dennis.
Yeah, thank you. Dr. Pierce, sitting across from me, alluded to not believing the science at times. To me, that gets troubling when we sit here as board members. I readily admit I don't understand the science. I'm not a scientist. I sat through the winter flounder board yesterday, and I saw things up there which just made my eyes roll. And I don't pretend to understand it, nor do I want to understand it. But I think it's concerning to me that if we can sit at this table and say we don't believe the science, we're really in a bad shape, in a bad position. I look at Jay over there as an eminent scientist, in my opinion, and if he says something at a meeting, I almost take it as gospel. I do understand that when technical committees meet, there are differing opinions, but when they're offered to us, I think it's incumbent on us, unless we have sound basis for disputing their positions, that we as a commission really have to abide by them. I'm not sure that's what you were trying to say, Dr. Pierce, and I assume you're a scientist also. Thanks.
I had Adam, and then we'll go to the preeminent scientist, Jason, back to me after that.
Based on the implications of our actions over the years, there's been a lot of loss in fishing communities, and I think Roy's most recent comments get to that. You look at the audience that we have for our meetings, multiple meetings, we go without public comment. So I think something here that, whether it's with Roy's comments, the preservation of fishing communities, I think is something that's relevant. As I look at the description of the driving forces in the strategic plan, the last sentence prior to describing each of these says, the strategic plan through its goals and broad strategies will seek to address each of these issues. And I think that preservation of fishing community would fit very well there. I know it's something we're contemplating at the lobster board level, specifically in southern New England, in crafting a way forward that would continue to maintain some semblance of a fishery. So I think it's relevant as we move forward.
Great, good comment. Thanks, Adam. Jason.
Yeah, I just, so first, thank you, Dennis. I really appreciate what you said. It's very flattering. I guess what I would suggest, though, scientists love to be questioned. That's like that's the process. It's a method, right? And it's a method of questioning and challenging each other. So that's how I read Dr. Pierce's comment, was to not necessarily just accept what people are telling us as gospel, but to challenge it when you have a reason to challenge it, and it's in fact built to do that. That, you know, so I think that is healthy and good. To if something doesn't look right, you should poke at it and figure out why. And there may be a good answer, and there may not. So that's how I read Dr. Pierce's comment, and I thought it was a good one. The way it's couched up there, you know, stepping back even another level, I didn't necessarily see it as you must do everything science says, as in the overlord of science is sort of controlling things. But however, you know, I think having reason and data drive our processes is a very good thing. It's how I understand the commission process to work, but there's lots of other things within there that we should be considering as well.
Great, thanks, Jay. Other thoughts on driving forces? Yes, John Clark.
Thanks, Bob. I don't know if it's covered in one of these already, but I was just thinking about changing demographics of the public, and thinking that in terms of, as with most state agencies, we're dependent on recreational fishing license sales. And while we haven't seen a real drop-off of that, they haven't really been increasing either, even though the population has been going up. And I think that's a nationwide trend. It's not as tough in fishing as it is in hunting, but I think the Menhaden issue has just shown us how much more interest there is from people who don't fish in some of these fisheries issues, where all of a sudden you have 5 years ago, a lot of people that probably didn't even know what a Menhaden was. Now I'm getting emails from thousands of people about this issue. And, you know, as I said, just putting that into one of the things that obviously we have to be cognizant of as we make these decisions is that we have different groups of the public watching these decisions, and I just think that's something that is a change that we'd have to look to.
That's a good point. There are definitely different audiences and different stakeholder groups that are emerging. Robert, you have your hand up?
Yes, sir, and maybe this has been covered already, and I don't know that it's a driving force, but I'll throw it out there. And I've heard it referenced in different terms, so maybe I'm being duplicative, and if so, I apologize. But, you know, I think we are in a post-institutional era where all our institutions, the integrity is somewhat questioned. Our decision-making processes, you know, we see this in the public arena by people talking about the rise of social media. I think it's deeper than that. And I think a reality that we should address somehow is that how do we maintain our credibility and our institutional integrity when if people don't like our science or our facts, then they just reject them out of hand. I don't know how to really capture that in a bullet, but and again, I've heard references of, you know, in science and social media and constituencies, but I think it's something we should consider at some point at the appropriate place. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Other questions on or comments? Yes, Lauren.
Yes, thank you very much. In regards to what we just heard about changing demographics, I can tell you that for my entire adult life as an educator, I have been very, very concerned that the youth that I try to introduce to fishing and quality aquatic resources and that kind of thing really, in my opinion, don't have a good solid grasp on what a quality experience would look like. All of those children that I'm dealing with when they're 4th, 5th, 6th, 7th, 8th graders are in about 10 years going to be voters. And that concerns me, honestly. You know, I learned what excellent fishing was and what clean water looked like back when I was 7, 8, 9 years old. I'm wondering how many of the youth of America really have a good solid grasp on that and then can express those concerns that they might develop by supporting really strong management initiatives. Thank you.
Thanks, Lauren. Good point. Other comments on driving forces? We've got quite a few we can incorporate. Yes, David.
Thank you. One of the things I guess that might help, I understand that a lot of what we do is we try to get a glimpse of what's currently in front of us, and we have an idea of what we'd like to see, but we're not always on the same page as to what the finished product looks like. I guess in some way, shape, or form sort of address, expectation management. Maybe the public might not have as much I guess, angst about what's going on here at these meetings if they understand, and if they understand what the goal is that we're trying to accomplish it, they may not be as upset about how we're trying to get to it. So I don't know if driving forces ought to include, what is the end state of this fishery? What is it we're trying to accomplish? And then rather than continually battling back and forth about, which scientist was most correct and which formula does the best job of whatever, we're all swimming the same direction, and at least we know what that direction is. Just a thought, maybe something like that might be included as a driving force.
Yeah, that's good idea. Where are we going on these fisheries? It's hard to describe sometimes. Yes, Dr. Pierce.
The ecosystem function part of the document is well stated. The paragraph in the document strikes to the heart of the matter regarding ecosystem management and what we're trying to do. I would, however, note that in this particular paragraph, the word the ecological sustainability is used, that you were committed to seeking ecological sustainability, and I just wonder out loud if indeed there is some place within the document that actually gets to that issue, defines it better. What exactly does ecological sustainability mean? That's one point. And the second point would be there's a good and very relevant reference to our continuing work on multi-species assessment modeling, and indeed that's what we continue to focus on, especially with some species like menhaden. Perhaps this paragraph can be modified somewhat by highlighting the fact that the Commission also remains committed not only to continuing its work on multi-species assessment modeling, but be a little bit more specific and say that we're also committed to working on modeling assumptions to determine if indeed those assumptions are correct. Much of what we do with modeling and much of what we will do with modeling pertains to the assumptions that go into those models, and there are many assumptions that are made, and oftentimes the assumptions are not valid, but we're obliged to use those assumptions anyways. So I'm just suggesting that some further thought be given to modifying that paragraph somewhat to really get to the heart of the matter, which is our continuing to delve into whether or not the assumptions that go into the model are valid. If not, why not? that's one reason why I'm always hesitant to embrace ecological models, because I know, and my scientific staff know, and they have advised me that those assumptions aren't necessarily valid. Yet we run with it, and that's a very uncomfortable feeling. And of course, those stakeholders, others who are watching us and who want those models applied, don't necessarily understand that the assumptions are invalid or very suspect. So this is an important part of our business, especially as it relates to man-made, and therefore, again, I suggest that there be another an emphasis on the assumptions.
Great, thank you. Oh, yes, Eric.
Yeah, thanks, Robert. I don't mean to beat science up any more than it already has, but the biggest problem or the biggest concern is not the science itself, the models themselves. It's the way we collect the data. I mean, that, to me, that's something that we should really consider. Mr. Abbott mentioned winter flounder yesterday. Of course, that's a pretty tough pill to swallow. But the encouraging part, although it didn't help yesterday, was Q. I mean, we are looking at the catchability coefficient of gear now, which is encouraging to me. I mean, it didn't help yesterday in flounders at all. But these are our concerns on. I mean, the foundation of what science is built on is the data we collect. And, to me, the concern is the way we're collecting our data is outdated. I mean, I realize saying that if you're going to start collecting data in a different way, it's going to put a lot of people, they're going to get their panties in a knot. But the reality of it is we have other options as far as the way we do things. Using a vessel that can't even fish in shallow water because the thing draws too much water. I mean, that's insanity to me. So, I think we should put science-based management and data collection methodology. I mean, to me, that should be at the top of the list.
Good. Thanks, Eric. Other thought, Jim mentioned aquaculture. We were sort of having a sidebar up here. Aquaculture is obviously a growing issue for the states, and there's some federal water activities that are emerging as well. And the current administration is looking to aquaculture to offset some of the reductions in harvest and trade balances and other things. So I think there may be some value in adding the notion of aquaculture in here. Commission is sort of tangentially involved with aquaculture. We don't directly, the states obviously do all the licensing and permitting and all the other things dealing with aquaculture, but I think we can serve as a bit of a clearinghouse and a coordinating body on aquaculture issues. So, and I think, wild harvest versus aquaculture harvest, there's going to be interplay and interactions with those in the next few years that we're going to probably have to consider in some of the management programs that we have. So there might be value, or at least to me anyway, it seems like there's value in adding some comments about aquaculture in here as well. So with that, we've got about, 10 minutes or so left in our allotted time here. I wanted to quickly just, go through each of the goals, and are there other overarching goals that we need to consider moving forward? The first three goals are up on the screen. Goal 1, rebuild, maintain, and fairly allocate fisheries resources, fish management that we do. Goal 2 is fish science, provide scientific foundation for and conduct stock assessment to support informed management actions. And then goal 3 is compliance, which is really the law enforcement activities. Is everybody comfortable with those three that's 3 out of the 8 goals that we're going to have? And there's obviously a lot of wording in the strategies under that we can open up and consider moving forward, but sort of as a major goal, everybody's comfortable with those? All right. The next 3, habitat, protecting and enhancing fish habitat and ecosystem health through partnerships and education. The partnership and education part here, I think, is important. ASMSC has very little authority to manage habitat. The state agencies have differing levels of authority, so we need to work together with the folks that can actually affect habitat and partnership with those folks, or partner with those folks, and that's how we're going to make our difference in the habitat world. Stakeholder and public support for the commission. This is our outreach activities. Make sure we're very transparent, make sure everybody knows what we're doing, getting our press releases out before the decisions are even made sometimes if we can. No, we can't be that fast, but close to it. And make sure everybody knows what we're doing, make sure the public is fully informed on why decisions were made and what science was used. They may not like it, but at least they know what the commissioners considered moving forward. And goal 6 is legislative activities. This is our engagement with Capitol Hill and state legislative bodies to, promote the commission activities, ensure the fiscal resources are available for the commission, and engage in things. The Atlantic Coastal Act has not been reauthorized in a while. Magnuson-Stevens Act reauthorization is out there. Just engaging in those processes. So is everybody comfortable with those 3 being the next 3 goals at the commission? All right. And the 7th one is just essentially the administration of the commission staff and our offices, and pulling all of you folks together. This is goal 7. It may not be goal 8. We may re-rack these a little bit, but the 8th goal will be ACCSP. Will incorporate a number of the details from the ACCSP strategic plan into this strategic plan, and just recognize that program as a program of ASMFC rather than its own sort of satellite entity that we shared an office with. So those are the 8 goals that I see moving forward. Seem to make some sense and are probably the right groupings. They're fair game for discussion, but I haven't seen any hands go up. So I guess folks are generally okay with those 8 grouping. Oh, Jason's going to mix it up. Good. He likes poking at things and questioning things. So.
That's right. I promise to be quick. So I was just thinking, based on what Eric said earlier, that concept will dovetail really good, I think, with the ACCSP goal. And just the other aspect of this is, I'm not sure if you have other specific goals for like the other programs within the commission. And so I wonder if a different approach could be actually morphing in some of those into the existing goals, just to speak to data collection and things like that, just as a alternative angle to think of it rather than having a standalone ACCSP goal.
That's a good comment. Obviously, there's overlap between fish management, fish science, ACCSP activities, and law enforcement and others. So, we'll see how we can interweave those together to show that overlap and importance of data collection. So with that, not seeing any suggested changes to the goals. Yes, David.
Thank you, Bob. Not necessarily excuse me. I've been too close to Jim Gilmore. Not necessarily a suggested change. I have plenty more candies, but I mean, one of the things that I think all of us kind of struggle with, and we talk about it different ways, is diversification in the industry, and an environment where the climate is changing and the resources are moving. We've historically had a perspective that we put people into boxes and states into boxes. Certain states have certain allocations of certain species, and that doesn't necessarily lend itself terribly well when the resources are moving out from some geographic areas. So I guess my question is, should we have something about promoting diversification in our fisheries and providing more flexibility for the industry to respond to changes in resource abundance as the resource moves up and down the coast? So I just throw that out as a concept.
Thanks, David. And there's probably at a minimum value and including that wording and some of the climate change, references that are in these driving forces. I'm not sure if it would be its own standing driving force, or standalone driving force, but definitely, the climate change issue and that overlap quite a bit. All right, so with the comments and the conversation that we've had over the last hour or so, what are folks thinking about process moving forward? Earlier, I suggested a working group, and that working group would be tasked with incorporating all my notes into the new document and bring that back at the August meeting. Doug and I were chatting a little bit earlier in that, do we want to do something more significant than that and have maybe even a facilitated workshop or something in May that draws out some additional ideas, or are we close, I guess is the question. Will a working group and 6 months of time to do some writing be enough, or do we want more commissioner engagement and more sort of brainstorming as a collective group of 45 individuals? So it's up to the group on process moving forward. What do folks think? Yes, Doug?
Well, as I stated earlier, Bob and Jim, given the desire to potentially make a modification to the vision, I think at a minimum we need to have a workshop to try and address that with all commissioners invited to be present.
Yeah, Jim just asked me if we have time and budget to do it in May. I think we can make it a priority to include it in May if that's what the group, agrees they want to do. This is your strategic plan, however you guys want to move forward. I guess, Doug, one of my comments would be all the commissioners were invited to this workshop and they didn't show up, so inviting them to the next one. I don't know if we'll get any different turnout, but we'll see.
Absolutely, but having a facilitated session for that, I think that's an important part, so that at least the people that do show up can have an input into it and then try and develop something that we can all agree on, or at least try to come up with some kind of a consensus on it.
Yeah, no, that's a great point. Other thoughts on process? Yes, I have Rob and then Emerson.
So I'm not suggesting a three-ring circus here, but this does not, having everyone together is great for some things, but it may not be the best thing to go forward here. It may be we can have those corny breakout groups where there are certain parts of the plan that one group does, another group does, and we get back together and talk. That might really work a little bit better rather than waiting to see who's going to come up with the next comment type of situation. So that's my suggestion.
That's good. Thanks, Rob. And I had another hand. Emerson.
Thank you. Somewhat related to the strategic plan, I guess, is our action plan. And I'm wondering where we are with the 2018 action plan. I notice we've got the 2017 action plan is available. So, it seems that the action plan flows from the strategic plan. And the one issue that I wanted to highlight on this is, and it's in our, or makes mention of it in our 2017 action plan, is interacting with the Mid-Atlantic Fishery Management Council on re-examining the research set-aside program. Mid-Atlantic Council has included that in their 2018 implementation plan. So I'm just wondering overall where we are with our action plan relative to including the, activities on the research set-aside program.
Yep. The 2018 action plan was approved at the annual meeting. It may not have been, it sounds like it may not be posted to the website, but it was finalized. Tony, is there research set-aside language in there? I can't recall. We'll find out, Emerson, and get back to you, I guess is the best way to do it. But it has been finalized and just needs to be posted. David.
Thank you. Very, very quickly, one suggestion might be is the changes that have been suggested here, and I'm assuming that at this point we can go ahead and call this a working draft, even though the original is still established, but maybe just simply shoot that out with the highlighted changes on it so that folks can look over it. And as far as splitting folks into different breakout groups, the only downside to that might be is there's probably 3 or 4 different areas a lot of commissioners might want to stick their fingers in, and being limited to just one area could potentially limit you from, or cause some limitations. But either way, if you were to send that draft forward, you know, we could kind of pin in what we really have to say. What one thing that if we've got to get 2 points out, these would be the 2 points, and really come back with maybe some of the legwork done, and then from there on out, it's only arguing your case in front of everybody else. Just a thought.
Yeah, sounds good. Thanks, David. Yes, Ray.
Yeah, getting back to Rob O'Reilly's statement, if we are going to go down this road of breakout groups, first I'll talk about regionalization. I think there's got to be much better cooperation amongst states within a region, and I don't want to create the Mason-Dixon line here once again with the way the regions have been set up, but getting back to Rob O'Reilly's point, I believe if you're going to have breakout groups, you need to have commissioners integrated throughout the entire East Coast. You cannot have people talking, you know, have a breakout group for the northern region and a breakout group for the mid-Atlantic region and a breakout group for the southern region. I think there on these breakout groups, these groups have to be integrated with commissioners from states up and down the coast. Thank you.
Thanks, Ray. Good point. Other thoughts? All right. Well, we've got a lot of good feedback. We're running over our time a couple minutes. I think I'll work with Jim and Pat Kelleher on process for the May meeting and see what time is available once we know the full suite of board meetings that need to happen in May, and then we'll you know, let you guys know what the process will be moving forward, and we'll try to incorporate this. So we do form a working group. Jim's going to be the guy who picks everybody, so you better be nice to him, and he'll I don't know, you can be nice to him and stay on it or be off of it. I don't know what that gets you, but so I think you know, a lot of good feedback. It sounds like, you know, while there are significant changes that folks have suggested, it doesn't sound like sort of completely blow up the document and start over. There seems to be a number of elements that need editing and need to be made more sort of maybe modernized, if you want to call it that, or made more contemporary. But there's a lot of this document that still can and should carry forward for the next 5 years. So I think that's probably a good sign, and that we're going in the right direction in general right now. We just need to do some course correction along the way. So with that, any other comments on the strategic plan? All right, seeing none, the Weakfish Board will start in about 10 minutes or so. Thank you all.